I want to bring into our coverage of this Democratic Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan. She's a member of both the Homeland Security and Armed Services committees. I know you are hardwired to view the importance of protecting national defense information and state secrets and intelligence. But what the Times is arguing, and what I think people that don't engage in journalism every day may not know, is that the Department of Justice has some rigor in its own systems to sort of pursue journalists as a last resort. Do you think it met those standards in this instance?
I mean, look, I have to see all the details, but it certainly sounds like yet another example of this administration weaponizing the Department of Justice and the legal channels that come with it against people they perceive as enemies. That is something that is very familiar to me. The president took me and others, to the grand jury earlier this year. So that seems to be the playbook that he's using. I've been working in national security for over 20 years at this point, and there are channels, there are ways to protect sensitive information, to have engagement with media sources when you think they're about to leak something that threatens national security. I've seen that in my own time. It is not taking them to a grand jury, going after their records of their family members. So I think this is, again, just another example of weaponizing the Department of Justice against people the president doesn't like.
Something that we learned only after the fact that the Trump administration was doing in Trump's first term was this sort of narrow thing that the judge seemed to at least pause, which was to pursue the phone records and to tell the Trump administration they couldn't have them. If it was something that was more widespread than we knew in the first term, how widespread, and you talked about, they pursued you and 5 other lawmakers. How widespread should we be at least open to questioning those practices? Could they be?
I think at this point, if you have a failure of imagination to think big about what this administration is willing to do, how they're willing to bend or break the law, then you're just not paying attention. I can't help you if you have a failure of imagination at this point, because he's telling us what he believes. He's telling us what he thinks. He's not hiding it. So, I think to me, I don't think that we should, I think there's this kind of hesitation by some people to think beyond the box. But this president has just told us with his own words over and over that he's more than willing, especially in his second term, to go outside that box, and we need to hear him on that.
One of the things that we wanted to ask you about was this extraordinary performance, is the only word I can think of for it, of Jay Clayton, who is Donald Trump's nominee to lead the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, literally an office created after 9/11. To protect America and to protect Americans. He was, well, let me show you what he couldn't say.
Answer the question. Who won the 2020 election?
I have answered the question.
Answer it. What is your answer?
I've given you my answer.
What is your answer? You refuse to answer a basic question about who won a presidential election?
No,
but you asked to lead America's intelligence community? Isn't it humiliating to be unable to answer this question, to have to indulge the president's delusions? We know, you know, everybody in this room knows the truthful answer to that question. Why can you not give it?
I think I gave you the answer.
What is the currency that an intelligence official has when the cameras aren't rolling, when they sit down with allies or adversaries and have to deal in this sort of gray area of intelligence?
Look, I think, I've worked at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, was there when it was being set up because of intelligence failures. The most important thing when you're trying to protect the homeland against threats, all kinds of threats, is you have to be able to call something out when you see it, whether it makes the president happy or not. And all of us, I'm a former CIA officer, we've had the experience of taking a piece of intelligence to the president or to a cabinet level official and being like, look, I know you don't want to hear this, but this is what's going on in an allied nation, or here's what's going on with people we consider friends, or here's what's going on, that's difficult and complicated, but we have to protect the American people in the dead of night, whether we like the threat or not. And I think when someone can't answer a basic question, an answer that should be easy for any person to answer, it really just says, why would I think that this person would ever be independent and straightforward about real threats facing the country? I put a piece of legislation in that says, even if you're going to be the acting DNI, you got to have some national security background. The guy's never had a security clearance. He's never handled classified information. So I think the whole episode, I think one day, historians will look back at this moment and the answers that so many of these nominees, theoretically very smart people, accomplished people, some of them, who came onto the stage of their confirmation hearing, and because of one viewer, the president watching from the Oval Office, they were unable to say basic information. And it will be a real time of shame and humiliation for us as a country. And the fear that they are living through, and as demonstrated by not being able to answer the question, is just so amazing and visible to the whole world. It's like the emperor has no clothes, and these guys are like, yeah, he's wearing full clothes. And so I think historians will study his answer and other nominees who have said the same.
Do you think it'll change the way people share sensitive classified information with the United States of America?
I think we're already seeing that. I think that intelligence agencies who have long worked alongside the United States, who have shared information with us, who have considered us the gold standard, are now hedging their bets. I mean, they're basically saying, okay, we'll still cooperate with the United States, but we better have our own channels. We better have our own, kind of trust but verify policies on what the Americans pass us. And we better be really, really careful on what we pass the Americans, because something can be used, manipulated, exposed. And I think it is part of this sort of astonishment that's going on across the world of what has happened to the United States and our security relationships.
I mean, on that front, Trump is engaged in an all-out war on voting and election integrity. I know you've been on top of the effort to limit people's access to and right to vote by mail. What is your sense of how successful Trump will be in his effort to use the United States Postal Service in his election suppression campaign?
Yeah, he tweeted about me last night about, my sort of concerns that the Postal Service was going to curb mail-in voting. But it's part of a much bigger story. And I think we need to be honest, especially after the primetime address that the president did this week. The president is using an authoritarian playbook that I have seen tons of times abroad, where he's sowing misinformation and disinformation about our elections because he thinks his team's going to lose. The man has basically said, including at the State of the Union, if my team loses, the system was rigged. When he wins, the elections were great. But when he loses, they're all fake. And he's building a case. And part of that is what he's doing with the U.S. Postal Service, trying to limit who can send in mail-in ballots. He's giving these addresses. He's gutting the VRA. He's doing all of these things. And I think what it tends to culminate in, this authoritarian playbook, it culminates in him creating a security incident that requires uniformed military or federal law enforcement to go to the polls, to surround polls, to collect ballots, or voting machines. And I think we need to be clear-eyed about that he is laying out this playbook ahead of November. And so we don't need to pick on each little thing that he does. We need to stand back from 40,000 feet and see what's happening.
Just quickly, I mean, his story, his bigger story, would have his base of voters believe that Presidents Obama and Biden ran fair and secure elections and he didn't. Do you think that slows the effort, or do you think that turbocharges it because it's so audacious?
I think that honestly, I think sometimes right now he counts on the American people somehow being dumb, and they're not. Right? That primetime address that he gave last week was, one, the economy is the best it's ever been. Gas prices are coming down. It's all great. Well, the average American is not dumb. They know their own pocketbook. They know what they spend. They know what they save. And then he talked obsessively about the elections and how they're going to be rigged, basically, if he doesn't win. The American people aren't stupid, and he's talking to them like they don't know their own country, especially in our 250th year. So I don't know what makes his case stronger or worse. I just know that he is treating the American public like they're dumb, and they are not dumb.
I'm hoping you are correct. I believe you are. Senator Alyssa Slotkin, thank you so much for your time on all these topics today. We're grateful.
Thank you.
When we come back.